Thank you, Millie Edwards. Hello. How is everybody? Doing fine? Is there a Chiefs game today?
Yes.
What time? I'll get you out in time. My cousin Ozzy went to the doctor this week. Walked into the doctor's office, went to the reception desk, and said, "I'd like to see Dr. Nordquist." And the lady behind the desk says, "Why do you want to see him?" And Ozzy said, "I have shingles." So she gave him a clipboard with a bunch of forms on it, told him to go have a chair and fill out the forms and bring them back to her. Took him about a half hour to do that, so he brought the clipboard back. She said, "Okay, please have a seat. A nurse will come out to get you soon." Ozzy went back, sat down. About 20 minutes later, a nurse came out, called his name, asked him to follow her. He followed her through a back door, down a hallway, into a very small room, where she gave him another clipboard with forms on it and told him to fill it out. He filled out those forms. She came back in about 15 minutes, and she said, "Why do you want to see Dr. Nordquist?" He said, "I have shingles." She said, "Okay, take off all of your clothes, put on this hospital gown, have a chair. Dr. Nordquist will be with you shortly." So Ozzy does exactly as he's told. He sits down in the chair. About 20 minutes later, Dr. Nordquist comes in. He says, "What can I do for you?" And Ozzy said, "The roofer sent me over. I have your shingles in my trunk." Thank you, David, for that very wonderful, encouraging laugh. Say, I want to draw your attention to the front of the bulletin for just a second. Please read this as I read it aloud. It says, "Remember, success must start wherever you are. 3 steps are necessary to its fulfillment. First, a deep-seated desire. Second, earnest effort. Third, faithful perseverance. When you are sure of your heart's desire, concentrate on it with thoughts and effort. Keep trying faithfully to attain it, praying always, thy will be done. Faith, love, courage." Very wise advice, I think. Now, that came from a letter that was written to Mrs. Mary E. Baker from Jetmore, Kansas, in 1938. And it was sent to her by the minister of this church back then. And I just want to draw your attention to this for 2 reasons. First of all, I find it absolutely amazing the way this church got its message out 76 years ago. It was handwritten on a piece of onion skin paper. I don't know how many of these sent out, but it was called Weekly Unity. So evidently, these went out to all the people interested once a week. I find that interesting in this day of technology with Facebook and email and texting and all the other stuff that's going on. We send messages around the world in a flash of a second. Somebody actually sat down and took the time to hand write this, and he probably did it hundreds of times a week. The other thing I find interesting is that the message itself is just as pertinent today as it was when it was written 76 years ago. It's solid, wise advice for how you can satisfy your desires. It's timeless. And that is the one thing that I really liked about Unity. That's what drew me to it when I first came here, is that it gave me principles that I could use to live a better life. The church that I had come from was exactly the opposite. They seemed to have an intent to keep me where I was rather than boost me to a higher position in life. For some reason, self-confidence and high ambitions weren't on their agenda. It was more of a controlling me in the seats so that they would have some sort of a dictatorial power over me. There was a time in my life, I left that church, and I left religion, and I left God, and I left Jesus Christ. I left it all because I just thought it was a bunch of bleep bleep. Later on, there was a time in my life when things really got bad. I was in the car business that I'd inherited from my father. It went broke. I got a divorce. I got involved in drugs and alcohol, and I just went right down the drain. At one point, I was head of 3 companies, making lots of money, The next thing I knew, I was working for minimum wage at TJ Cinnamon's, making cinnamon rolls in the early morning shift. And as I started to come out of this, I was able to justify my addictions. And I developed a story around them. It's like, who wouldn't drink and who wouldn't use drugs if this happened to them? I lost my inheritance. Who wouldn't drink if that happened to them? I lost my family. Who wouldn't do drugs if that happened to them? It was all justified around this poor me. And that kept me exactly where I was at. My social group at that time was still pretty strong, and they'd come around, and I'd tell them my story of the poor me pity party. And they were encouraging at first, but then eventually they got tired of the story, and one by one, they just kind of distanced themselves from me. So this went on, and this went on, and this went on, and one day I was all by myself, sitting on the edge of the bed, telling myself the story because nobody else would listen. And in the middle of the story, I yawned. And I realized that I was boring myself with this story. That something had to change. Well, I lived just down the street from Unity, and so I came here, started reading different things, started coming to some of the services, and I discovered tools, I discovered principles that could actually help me pick myself up and move myself forward, and it made all the difference in my life. If I wouldn't have come here, I don't know what I would be doing today, because it was like curtains opening in a field of desperation that let sunlight in and allowed me to see a future that I could proceed towards. One of the biggest principles that Unity gave me was our thoughts create a reality. And it was impressed upon me that no matter what had happened in my life, no matter how many people had abandoned me, no matter how much I had lost, that did not make a difference right here and right now, because I had within me what I needed to pick myself up and move myself forward and to attain anything that my heart desired. And that gave me faith, it gave me trust, it gave me inspiration. So I began to do that. I joined a program, one of those seminar type things, and it impressed upon us the importance of affirmations, affirming. In this particular one, it was every day and every way I get better and better. In every day and every way I get better and better. And we were to say that 100 times. Say it when you get up in the morning. Say it when you're in the shower. Say it when you're driving to work. Say it when you go to bed at night. In every way I get better every day. And I'd affirm it, and I'd affirm it, and I'd affirm it. But I just didn't feel it. I mean, I'd cleaned myself up from drugs and from alcohol, but I didn't feel like anything had really changed. And so I was talking to the minister who was here at that time, and I was telling him about my dilemma. And he said, well, what do you feel when you think about everything you've lost? I said, well, I feel anger. And he said, why do you feel anger? It's because I'm a failure. Why do you feel like a failure? Because I'm a disappointment. Well, who are you a disappointment to? My father, who had died 15 years previous. And just then it came to me that what I was doing is trying to live my life based on what my father desired. And I had disappointed him many, many times growing up. I was a little bit delinquent. I was a little bit rebellious. I did a lot of things I shouldn't have, and I always felt like I was a disappointment. But now his life's work was taken down by me, so I felt like a disappointment in his eyes. He said, well, let me ask you this. Do you think somehow, some way your father might be looking down on you and be disappointed? No. He never showed disappointment. I just felt that. He said, well, you're not a disappointment. Now, the point I'm telling you this is, no matter what happens in your life, no matter what's going on in your relationships or whatever else, you can think the solution into being, and you can affirm and affirm and affirm, but until you get behind that to the emotion that created those thoughts, nothing is going to change. Emotion charges thought, emotion creates thought, but you cannot change the emotion through thought. You have to go back to the emotion. When I first started in Unity, the third principle was your thoughts create your reality, and that's absolutely true to a certain extent. We move into any situation, circumstance, or activity, our senses perceive what is going on. That perception is sent to the mind, and the mind generates thought to define what you are perceiving. Then we determine how we feel about how we've defined what is going on. But another thing I like about Unity, not only that they have principles that are solid and that can withstand the test of time, but they're also willing to move, they're willing to evolve, they're willing to grow. When new things come into the landscape, and see that there's room to advance this idea. And as of late, I've been reading a study called Emotional Intelligence, and it kind of advances this idea of our thoughts create a reality. And what actually happens is we move into a situation, circumstance, or activity, we perceive what's going on, and the minute we perceive it, every cell in our body is affected by the energy that is transferred from what is going on to our body. That energy then courses through the body and arrives at the base of the brain, which alerts the nervous system. Now, this is much, much more than you want to need, than you need to know, but it alerts the nervous system. It then has to travel through the back of the brain to the frontal lobe, where reasoning and logic take place, where we think things out. But in order to get to the back, to the front, it has to pass through the limbic system, which is the emotional system. So the emotions kick into gear, they move into our thinking process, and they dictate what our thoughts generate. Does that make sense? We perceive, then we feel, and then we think it out. And they did that for a specific purpose. I say they, meaning many gods, but God did that for a specific purpose because emotions are much, much faster and they're much, much more reliable than thoughts. When the ancient caveman was confronted with a saber-toothed tiger, he didn't have time to stop and think, what should I do? You know, his entire system was jolted with fear, and he began running, trying to escape before he even thought about what was going on. The same thing holds true for us today. If we're walking across the street and we see a bus racing towards us, we don't stop and think, what are my options here? It's the emotion of fear, the emotion for survival kicks in, and we start to move before we're even thinking about what we're doing. It's just natural. It's a preservation design. Now that holds true not only in severe cases where our survival is threatened, but also in everyday life. If you're in the midst of a conversation with somebody and you begin to feel something but you don't know what, it is a signal that you need to determine what you're feeling and why you're feeling it. And those are the two big questions, no matter what happens. If you get disturbed, if you get disgusted, if you get irritated, if you're in conflict, there's two things. What are you feeling? And we got 5 to 7 basic emotions. But within those 5 basic categories, we have many, many variations. You can be angry, but there's probably 8 or 10 different variations of anger. But normally, we just go with the anger and overlook emotions, go straight to our thoughts. And we think, and we think, and we think, and we think, with ever finding out why we're acting or reacting the way we are. When we move back to the emotion and ask, what exactly am I feeling, and why am I feeling it, then we start tracing the reason for what is happening. And it's always 3 steps back. It might be so-and-so made me angry. That's why I'm feeling angry. And the question is, why? Why did she make you angry? Well, because she reminds me of my sister, a big know-it-all. So you're angry with your sister? Yeah. Why? Well, because I felt less than my sister. It always ends up with the self. no matter what happens, how something makes you feel about yourself, good or bad, happy or sad, and that dictates the experience that you're going to have. The key or the reason for any successful or failing relationship is always based on how that other person makes you feel about yourself. So naturally, the goal is to rise to the point where nobody dictates how we feel about ourselves. People fail, people fall down, people make mistakes, they make errors. We all do. But you and you only can determine how you feel about yourself. Nobody else can dictate that to you. And if you feel it is their fault, you start tracing it back and you discover it's not that fault at all. It's just something within me that's been there for a very long time that is triggered when I run into certain situations and circumstances. So, that being said, to keep on time, we'll now move into meditation. Take a moment to relax. Take a deep breath and exhale, and just slowly go into that special space, that special spot where there is pure calm. Oftentimes we look at painful, hurtful emotions as the enemy, as something that shouldn't be. It's something that holds us down and keeps us down. But in actuality, every negative emotion, every hurtful feeling is a stepping stone that we can learn from, rise above and move beyond whatever it is that has bothered us for so long. It is understanding why we feel the way we do, and then raising that understanding to a new level of awareness that allows us to release it.
divine love, that love that is the essence of my being, that never dissipates, never disappears, divine love in me, multiplies the gratitude and the joy that I feel for everything in my life, for everything that I have, for everything that I give. And so it is.